Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today I'm repping my school. If you guys don't know, I go to McGill University. I study business. I thought I would share with you guys 10 tips that I think are very useful for Zoom University. You guys saw from the intro, don't be like Tim. Let's get right into the video. So let me bring my laptop where I have all these secrets that I'm about to spill. I separated the tips into a few categories. We're gonna get started with the more general ones. So my first general tip is to go to office hours. I never went to office hours up until Zoom University. And for me, I don't go because I have questions. I'll go especially around assignment time when I kind of want to get guidance and make sure I'm heading in the right direction. My second general study tip is to understand the marking scheme of every class. So you'll know how many assignments you have to do throughout the semester, and especially you don't want to realize halfway through the semester that participation is worth 15% and you did not show up to any class. Now, moving on to study tips. So the first one is to understand the class structure, because for me, how I approach the class is different depending on whether the class is done through recorded sessions or whether it's live lectures on Zoom. When I have a live lecture, I would really recommend to go to class. It forces you to not fall too much behind. Like once you start skipping class, you're like, I can just watch it whenever. Next thing you know, your recordings have piled up and you have like 12 hours worth of recording to do. Because I'm taking notes during class and typing, I don't always have the time to complete my notes. So right after class or like the weekend following, I will go back to the notes for that particular session and then complete them. And then once I'm done that, I'm basically done with my notes for that particular session. I always type out the PowerPoint, especially in the context of Zoom, where most of your exams will be open book. You want the content to be typed so that you can easily search it. So how I would approach a recorded lecture is I would have already gone through the PowerPoint. So I'll have like typed out everything in the PowerPoint, taken screenshots of like graphs, etc. And then I'll listen to the recording. So my third tip is just write your notes on your computer for online school. I actually did a dumb mistake last semester of writing notes from my finance class by hand. And then I realized like 2 days before the final, I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to control fine? All I have to say is don't put yourself in this situation. If you do really need to memorize things, for example, presentations, I would recommend you to write it, let's say about a few days or maybe like even a week before, so that you have time to read it every day before sleep. Tim and I reacted to one of my old study tips video, which I'll link up here, where we said that basically this is the only tip that we still follow. Reading before you sleep is a really, really good way to remember it better. It's called memory consolidation, quoting Tim. And if you just do that, you'll know already most of what you want to say. And it will just be a matter of kind of rehearsing a few times and with the slides to make sure like you fall within time and that you sound more comfortable. And then my last tip is related to group work. So my recommendation for group work is to take a proactive role if you can. It can be simple things like, hey guys, when are we meeting, right? And you can always send like a when to meet to see everyone's availability and schedule a meeting. A lot of my projects were done on Google Drive, so like Google Docs, Google Sheets, etc. So you can always take initiative and start the document. So you could be like,
hey guys, I thought it would be good for us to brainstorm, so I made a document, feel free to add stuff.
And like I've done that. And honestly, I was like kind of embarrassed because I usually never do that. You might get ignored, but people will fill it up. So I think it's really worth. Now we can move on to tips related to taking an exam. First tip, you should have all your notes open and organized so that you can quickly search during your exam. If it is open book, of course. I made the mistake for my first exams of just opening all, because I would take notes for each session in a different Word document. And then I would just open 20 Word documents, and that would just make my computer super slow. And one time my computer accidentally shut off because it was overheating during my final. This brings me into my next tip, which is to understand what kind of exam you have. Is it a timed exam or is it a take-home assessment? I would say that for the timed exam, despite it being open book, you should really know your material, because if you spend too much time searching, you might not finish your exam. To avoid that, treat it like a real exam. When it comes to the theory part, make sure you read your notes multiple times. You want to make sure to give yourself enough time so that you don't overdose. Like, you don't want to be reading through your notes 3 times a day, because one, you'll be really bored, and 2, you just literally will be reading to read and you won't actually be retaining anything. This is where the tip about reading before sleep is also very handy. But honestly, if you do that, don't read your notes in bed, because there's a high probability that you will actually fall asleep instead of finishing to read your notes. Guilty, did that way too many times. When it comes to take-home assessments, you don't have that time constraint. So still read the notes once or twice that you're comfortable with the material. Wait until the questions of the assignment are released. Go through all your notes and then copy-paste the relevant material for every question. It's very unlikely that you miss a critical point, right? Because you're actually going through every single session. And then it's time to just put everything together nicely. Review your work. Like, the amount of times I sent stuff that had typos when I could have just done grammar checking is too high. Oh, also, when it comes to take-home assignments and essays, do not waste your time citing your sources by yourself. It's so tedious. Please use an online source generator, and of course check them, but I use Citation Machine. Now let's move on to organization tips. I have 2. My first one is prioritization. Understand the weight of each assignment for each class and schedule your time accordingly. You don't want to be spending the same amount of time preparing or doing an assignment that's worth 5%, especially if you have multiple things due that week. You should focus your energy on what is worth more. And this brings me to my second tip, which is to schedule ahead of time what you have to do. I started using Notion this semester. The main idea is that on Sunday, I'll plan the following week. Then I know all the deadlines I have. I also just kind of schedule how much time I expect each deliverable to take me that week. So that way I know how much free time or procrastination I can afford. As you start approaching the end of the semester, you have a better grasp on how you're doing in every course. Then you can also prioritize depending on which course you need higher grades in to get the grade you want. It's totally okay to put a bit more effort into the class you're struggling to try to get good results. Now we're gonna move on to my last 2 tips, which are related to well-being. So while this doesn't necessarily correlate to getting a 4.0, when you're feeling well, you're more motivated to study. And also, getting a 4.0 is not worth trading off your mental well-being and your sanity for. So that's why these tips are included as well. First tip, try to schedule time off. That way you don't feel guilty, right? You don't feel like you're procrastinating because it's in your calendar to, I don't know, watch a Netflix show, watch this K-drama, or call a friend. That way you will avoid feeling burnt out, especially if you work yourself too hard at the beginning of the semester and then you run out of steam for finals. My last tip is to go to online social events. So if there's a club that interests you, you should definitely join their social events. And it can actually be a bit less intimidating than in person, I find. I never really felt like going, but every time I went, I had so much fun. And it's a good way to relax as well. So I guess that concludes the 10 tips for Zoom University on how to get a 4.0. So I hope that these tips will be useful. If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to give a like, subscribe, and comment down. Oh my god, I still do this. Comment down below if you found any tips useful. Thank you guys so much for watching, and hopefully see you next time. Bye-bye.